As the leader of the Booner Pat, I lead from the front.
All right, boys. Lock in.
It's our core foundation, man. Grit.
I'm fired up. I'm fired the f*** up, boys.
It's pumping right now. It's got my juice pumping, boys.
Welcome to the Jeff Iafrate Show here on a Monday morning after the NFC and AFC championship games. We have our Super Bowl. Seahawks taking on the New England Patriots, which I don't know how you guys feel about the Super Bowl matchup. You know, I watched both games. They were both incredible games. I know the snow game in the second half of the Broncos-Patriots game was, as a fan, depending on if you love snow games or not, that was disgusting. And the Broncos with Jarrett Stidham kind of hung in there. They should have took the points early on. They did not, but the Patriots get away with a win. And the Seahawks, kind of same thing. Sam Darnold played an incredible game. They get out with a win there. Matthew played out of his mind as well. And the Rams just couldn't get it done. Special teams errors, their defense slipping over the last handful of weeks. Seahawks are in the Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. And today I'm going to give my takeaways just from – because I like to do this. I really do. I mean, we covered the Detroit Lions. I like to watch the playoffs. And, you know, you have to watch with a purpose. At least I try to. And my purpose is understanding what separates these teams from the Detroit Lions. How are they having success? Why are the Detroit Lions at home? Today, I'm going to bring up some points, some of my thoughts on what the Lions can do this offseason and kind of get to where the Seahawks are. I'm just looking at the NFC. AFC you can use also as a comparison, but just take on the top of the NFC conference, which the Seahawks have been able to achieve. You know, they get the number one seed, and they did some damage this year. I'm not going to lie. That defense is really good. I know they didn't play their best game against the Los Angeles Rams, but they just find ways to win games, man. And it was an incredible coaching job from the Seahawks. So I'm going to go through it all today. Daniel Jeremiah came out with his mock draft. I'll go through who he selected for the Detroit Lions. We'll react to that. Updates in the coaching cycle. And I'll go through some other things as it pertains to free agency. Pride of Detroit came out with an article, 4 free agents the Lions should target this offseason. So we'll get to that as well. Appreciate you guys all tuning in. Yeah, the time's a little weird. I had to drive somewhere back home. It was about an hour drive close to. This weather sucks. So sorry for the delayed start, but we are here. Kind of working through this weather here. Roads are better. It's not as bad as it was yesterday. But we're here at a weird time, but we are here. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Like I said, hit the like button on the stream. I think we're approaching 16.2 thousand. So let me check right now. Yeah, we're about 50 away from 16.2 thousand. So go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll get to some of these comments. Icewater Olson, appreciate the comment. He says Seahawks missed the playoffs last year with a good offseason. Adding to a good roster than a Super Bowl is fair and realistic expectations. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think this season, you know, probably, I guess, scars Lions fans in a way to where this offseason, you know, you're hoping for, moves and changes. But then going into next year, it's like, well, let's just make the playoffs. No. You should still have Super Bowl expectations. That's what the standard is now. You know, congratulations. This is where you want to be as a Lions fan. You want to be held to that standard of making a Super Bowl and winning a Super Bowl. I try to have high expectations because the Lions have given us an NFC Championship appearance. They've given us, you know, a number one seed, even though they didn't win a playoff game during that year. But, you know, the injuries kind of caught up to them. But they've given us this success. I think it's time to raise those expectations. I think a Super Bowl this year is a fair expectation. You know, you should expect that every year. That's why the Bills fired their head coach. You know, like the Bills, look at what the Bills have done over the last 5 to 7 years. I mean, they've been in the playoffs every single year, but they haven't made the Super Bowl. So guess what? They fired their head coach. There's some organizations that are okay with doing that. And, you know, Sean McDermott, whether you agree or disagree, he should have been fired. I don't disagree necessarily. I think they've underachieved with Josh Allen. But the point of this conversation is you could argue there's Bills fans out there that are like, hey, man, we enjoy being in the playoffs. We like being in the playoffs. We like competing for a Super Bowl, or at least thinking we're competing by being in the playoffs. But then there's other Bills fans that are like, nah, man, it's not good enough. We should be in the Super Bowl, especially this year. You know, they didn't have Joe Burrow in the playoffs. They didn't have Mahomes in the playoffs. So they fire Sean McDermott from the Bills for that reason, even though they made the playoffs. So I'm not saying that you're the Bills, but what I'm saying is you make an NFC championship game, like you have a very talented roster. 4 All-Pros, by the way, playing football for you. You would add more if Kirby Joseph played, but still 4 All-Pros playing football for you, and you didn't make the playoffs. So this offseason, to me, guys, is all on Brad Holmes. This is the Brad Holmes offseason. It really is. And I know we could talk about Drew Petzing and talk about the offense and why we're skeptical, but the reality is, if you guys haven't watched the NFL playoffs and thought to yourselves, man, these defenses are really good, I don't know what you're smoking. That should be the objective thought from people watching the NFL playoffs. You're watching, I mean, this weekend, you just watched 4 teams go at it, and all 4 teams were top 10 in scoring defense, okay? And I know that the Rams and Seahawks game were high scoring. It seems like those teams just know each other very well, but still, like that Seahawks defense made timely plays and timely mistakes. Tariq Woolen made a boneheaded mistake, which cost a touchdown. But that game, I mean, the Rams technically only scored like 20 points if it wasn't for that 4th down mistake by Tariq Woolen. So that defense came to play at times, and you saw it, the making plays. The rookie, Nick Amanawari, clutch pass deflections. He was all over the field. Devon Witherspoon, they were kind of going at him, and I know they can't really stop Devontae and Puka, but still, their pass rush, their defensive line caused issues. I mean, Sam Darnold, yeah, he had a great game, which, by the way, surprised. I've been a big Sam Darnold doubter, but he played really well. But their offensive line isn't great, the Seahawks, and they still found a way to get it done. But my takeaway is the defense, right? Defensively, for every one of these teams, they find a way to make plays. I mean, Broncos and Patriots was a snow game, so it was kind of a disgusting watch in the second half, but you could still say those defenses went at it. And I know the Patriots bought their defense, but defenses win championships. Quarterback play helps. Definitely. You need a great quarterback play. Obviously, Sam Darnold playing well helped the Seahawks, but you need great quarterback play, you need a defense, and you need great coaching like the Seahawks just displayed yesterday. Look at that. Clint Kubiak running the offense, Mike McDonald running the defense. That's as good of a coaching job as it gets. I mean, those two did a really good job. And Clint Kubiak's going to leave and become a head coach. So, yeah. And then I agree, Coach, by the way, like the Cooper Kupp stuff, like that, there's some questionable calls in that game. I'm not going to lie. But, a couple of those calls could have went either way. But the Seahawks deserved it, man. They're a really good team. John Schneider, which I'm going to talk about John Schneider as well, because I kind of hit on this last week when I was talking about John Schneider and the job he's done building the Seahawks. And I have an interesting stat that I want to show you guys in about a couple of minutes here that I'm going to go through that shows how great John Schneider is. And I'm not trying to take a victory lap because I could care less, because you guys know how transparent I am. I get a lot of things wrong, okay? So I'm not the guy that's going to flex in your face when I get things right. Has nothing to do with that. But I have been big on John Schneider for a while. I've had him in my top 5 GMs for a while. He's won a Super Bowl, and now he's in another Super Bowl with a completely different roster. And I understand that Brad's first 3 years here was insanely impressive, and he deserved a lot of praise when he first got here and all the things he was able to do. But longevity with some of these GMs is just impressive. It really is. I mean, John Schneider's doing an excellent job. I'm not just saying that to, in spite of Brad Holmes, like trying to crap on Brad Holmes. I'm just being objective. Like John Schneider, think about the teams he's built. He's been in Seattle for a while, and I know he hasn't had the time Brad Holmes has had, but dude, that guy is consistent. He hits on a lot of draft picks. I mean, he might be one of the best evaluators in the entire NFL when it comes to what he does in the draft. They just find guys in the draft that come and contribute. I mean, they really do. And to do that consistently is really hard. And John Schneider's shown that, he can do that. It's just the reality. Like Les Snead with the Rams. Like he's not perfect either, but those guys just find really good players. I mean, the Rams lost, and look at all the talent they have in general. I mean, I bet the Rams fans are devastated because talent-wise, you could argue they have better players, but the Seahawks are more complete. They just are. Let me show you guys this graphic, okay? I'm going to show you this graphic, and we'll talk about the GM stuff because this is insane. So I saw this, and I want to show you guys this. This was crazy, okay? So George Schultz put this out. Seahawks GM John Schneider is the first GM in NFL history to reach multiple Super Bowls with the same organization while having a new head coach and no players from the previous Super Bowl team. Do you know how insane that is? Like, That's stuff you do in Madden, where you're playing Madden and you're just making a bunch of, you win a Super Bowl, make a Super Bowl in Madden, and then you just trade everybody, make a bunch of moves, and you get back to a Super Bowl. Like, it's video game stuff. It's very hard to do this. Okay. To go from the previous regime with Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, that defense that they had that was incredible and had Hall of Famers on that defense. And then to be where they're at. Now, they had down years, of course, but to rebuild that team, to get where they are now, to hit on their next head coach, Mike Macdonald, for Mike Macdonald to assemble the staff he assembled, Clint Kubiak, they got Jake Peets on that passing game coordinator, in that passing game coordinator role, which he interviewed for the Lions job. But they just have really good coaches on that staff. And on top of that, John Schneider's hit on a bunch of draft picks, dude. Like, I went through this last week. His last 2 years, he's still found 3 players at least that are contributing every draft, and that is the difference, right? Like, the Lions had that early on with Brad Holmes where he was just hitting on draft picks and, he built an incredible roster. But the last 2 drafts, it's been shaky for Brad. And sometimes, and I know no one's going to be perfect, obviously. I'm not expecting Brad to hit on every draft pick, but man, if you can just find a couple guys, this is what separates great teams from good teams. When you can find productive players that are making pennies, he's finding guys that are on rookie contracts that are coming in and impacting the game. Like, this is something I want to point out, and Booner actually sent me this. So shout out to Boone. Like, this is what's ridiculous. So the Seahawks this year, the 2025 Seahawks starters on defense, $89 million average salary. Okay, $89 million is their average. The salary they have on defense. $69 million cap hit on defense. So the Seahawks have a $69 million cap hit on defense. The Lions have a $91 million cap hit. So, I mean, you're talking roughly a 20-ish million more cap hit than the Seahawks, the Lions do. Okay. And the Seahawks were the number 1 defense in the NFL. The Lions are 22nd. So the Lions are spending more money on defense and they're worse. That's why I wanted to make sure I hit on coaching, how important that is. Like, they have guys that are cheap, that are overachieving, or I don't want to disrespect them and say overachieving, but they're getting everything out of those players. And you look at some of the impactful players they've drafted, like Byron. They got that defensive lineman, I believe, out of Texas. What's his name? Byron Murphy II. He had like 7.5 sacks this year. They drafted him out of Texas, second-year player. Last year played for the Seahawks. He was okay, and then this year had a massive jump, had 7 sacks. Interior defensive lineman. They've hit on some very important players up front, and just in general, their secondary. I mentioned Nick Imanawari, rookie. He's having a really good year. So, again, the Seahawks have a cheaper defense, and they're playing much better. So I think that is a mix of what the GM has done drafting and also coaching, of course. That's really what it comes down to, is what they've been able to do in the draft. And I'm going to point out the obvious. Okay, I'm going to point out the very obvious here. And listen, you guys, I've said this multiple times. I don't know what side of the fence you're on. I don't think that Jared Goff is as bad of a quarterback as people think, but the reality is what you pay your quarterback dictates what you can spend in free agency. That's just the obvious, okay? And I know people want a guy that can move around and be more mobile. I understand that. Sam Darnold's making significantly less money. Like, you know what Sam Darnold's cap hit this year was for the Seahawks? And this is what allowed them to spend money in free agency. Sam Darnold's cap hit this year is $13.4 million. His cap hit, okay? $13.4 million. His cap hit next year is $33.9 million. And Sam Darnold has, turns the ball over a lot, but he played really well against the Rams. So when you have a quarterback making essentially pennies, I think he signed a 3-year, $100 million contract. They're able to spend more money in free agency. So I'm not discounting that. So cheaper quarterback, cheaper defense, playing better, playing really well. Like, it's a ridiculous number what Sam Darnold is making. I mean, it is $13.4 million cap hit. And that's not his salary, but that's his cap hit this year. How they structured the contract was really smart. And then you have Drake May on the Patriots, who's on a rookie deal. So I'm not naive to the fact of, if you have a young quarterback, you can spend more money, obviously. And both those guys can move. So I'm not, it is what it is. Can we agree that Jared's a better quarterback than Sam Darnold? People might disagree. I think you're crazy. I think Jared Goff's better. But man, is he, look at the price difference. I mean, you can't be naive to that. I mean, Jared Goff's cap hit next year, and they're going to restructure it. It's probably I think it's like 60, 70 million. So that clearly hurts the Lions when you talk about spending money. That's an obvious statement. Like, they just don't have as much money to spend given what they've spent on other players. Don't discount that, but also what they're spending on their quarterback. But let me show you guys this tweet by Jeremy Reisman, because it kind of hits on the fact of what the Seahawks were able to do because they had more money to spend. And this is what's important, because I saw a lot of people tweeting, well, the Patriots and the Seahawks spent a bunch of money in free agency, and now they're here in the Super Bowl, So, that's why you should spend more money in free agency. Well, it's not that simple. And I know it would be awesome if it was that simple, but it's really not. And Jeremy put this out, and I do agree with what he was saying in this tweet here. So let's look at this. So he says, if you can get away with paying your quarterback peanuts, you should absolutely and can be aggressive in free agency. If not, good luck. Okay, that's what hurts other teams. Obviously, like I said, Patriots have a rookie quarterback, and the Seahawks are paying Sam Darnold pennies. Because look at this. This is Benjamin Solak. He tweeted this out. NFL free agency spending by team this year. Look at this. The contract value. This is what was spent this year. The New England Patriots were number 1 in spending. Number 4 was the Seahawks. They were both in the Super Bowl. That's so people look at that and say, well, if the Lions just spent more, they would be there. Well, they're also paying their quarterback pennies. This is what Jeremy put out too. Other playoff teams ranking in free agency spending by overall contract value. See, this is your playoff teams. Panthers 6th, the Bears 9th, Jags 11th, Packers 12th, Broncos 13th, Rams 16th, Bills 17th, Texans 19th, Chargers 20th, Steelers 23rd, 49ers 25th, and Eagles 32nd, Lions were 21st. So it's not all about free agency. They should be in the playoffs, the Lions. There's no denying that. They should be in the playoffs, even if they were 21st in free agency spending. They were. And then he tweeted this out, which matters, right? The biggest free agent spenders in 2024: Panthers 5-12, Falcons 8-9, Titans 3-14, Commanders 12-5, Vikings 14-3. So it's kind of goes both ways. It's not all about spend more in free agency, win more games, right? The Eagles were 11th, Chiefs were 28th. So I think the big takeaway from all of this is what these teams are able to do with a rookie quarterback, or a cheap quarterback for that matter. So, these Patriots and Seahawks are able to spend more because they have cheaper quarterbacks. But this is where I want to make sure I hit on, and I know I've been talking about this a lot, but people in the chat, you guys, we've been following this team for years now, and I've said this multiple times, and I still will continue to repeat this because of how important it is. The Lions' window to spend that money is gone. They don't have the opportunity they had years ago to spend that money or spend more money. What they decided to do was extend guys and keep their own guys and pay a lot of money to their own guys. And whether or not you disagree with that, that's just the reality. That's what they've done, right? They've paid Aleem, they've paid J-Mo, they've continued to pay their own players, paid Kirby Joseph, and now, they were more passive in free agency when they had money, more passive in making moves when they had money, and guys were making pennies. Because the Lions were the Seahawks at one point. They did have a cheap team, and they were in an NFC Championship game. Their quarterback was making less. Okay, they were that team at one point. They did have this type of opportunity at one point. When you go back to 2023, you had most of your impactful players on rookie contracts, and your quarterback was making significantly less. You had that opportunity, and you had Ben Johnson, just like the Seahawks have Clint Kubiak. Mike McDonald is a great defensive mind. I mean, Aaron Glenn had his moments where people were, going at him, but they had that. They had all of that together, collectively. They had the cohesiveness with their coaching staff. They had a cheap team. They had money to spend. Remember when we were covering the offseason and they had $30 million to spend? What were the Lions going to do this offseason? Well, that time is over. That has passed. That's why when people look at those trade deadlines, like 2023, that trade deadline, and you go, you acquired DPJ. Well, the Seahawks acquired Rashid Shaheed at this deadline, and look how impactful he's been for them. And they were already a really good team. They were winning games, and they're like, we're missing a piece. We're going to go get a piece that we really need on offense. And look how impactful it's been for them. The Lions got DPJ, and he did nothing for them that 2023 trade deadline. So, you missed that opportunity. And whether it was Brad Holmes being passive or making the wrong moves, that's just the reality. Now, you're at a point where all those cheap guys are now making more money. It's just the reality. Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, Kirby, Brian, Jack, Sam, all these guys are Jameer. I mean, I could keep going. Aleem. I mean, all these guys are now hitting into their what they're going to make, which is a lot of money, and you're not going to be able to pay all of them. And that's why Brad Holmes, when you talk about sustained success, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it because there's no sustained success if you're not consistent. Like, that's for teams that have a Tom Brady or Mahomes or, Bill Belichick or Andy Reid, where they're just in the Super Bowl every year because they have a Hall of Fame quarterback who's like the top 2 guy of all time. If you're not those guys, then you have to have a team that just makes a run and you try to compete when you have the best chance, and their best chance is passed. That's just the reality. So what do the Lions do moving forward? Well, you got limited resources, okay, but you can still move some money around and try and make moves in free agency. They can still improve. They still have a good team. I'm not saying that, that they're not going to do anything for the foreseeable future, but their best chance is passed. Now it comes down to, what does Kelvin Shepard do this year as a DC? What does Drew Petzing look like? And then on top of that, what can Brad do in free agency with limited resources? That's just the reality. And it gets harder, guys. It does. Jesse says they spent a little extra on Lawrence out of Dallas too. Williams from the Giants was on a cheap deal. Definitely could have got Williams on that deal back in 23, but Brad didn't do it. Yeah, Jesse. I mean, that's, again, like the Seahawks, Brad will respond and say, well, they don't have an Aiden Hutchinson. Well, no, but they have better collective talent and they have better coaching. Like Aiden Hutchinson is better than both those guys, but they have them together. And on top of that, they have a bunch of other really good players. And now Aiden Hutchinson's going to make a boatload of money, and you still haven't found an answer to who's playing alongside Hutch, which later in the show we'll get to Daniel Jeremiah's draft and what the Lions do in the first round. Maybe that'll help Aiden Hutchinson. Just slight tease there. But yeah, I agree. Like, you had those opportunities to sign guys, and at the time it was like, well, you don't want to mess up extending other guys. You didn't have to. These guys weren't due for contracts for a couple of years at the time. Now they're due. Like, now you can't go and sign guys to a couple year deals because you have to pay other guys, and you might not be able to pay some of those guys. So it's just the reality. This comment, what Brad can do is, let me speak on this too. So pass rush and O-line. I love this comment, by the way. This is a great comment. Talking about the O-line and the pass rush. Okay. So the O-line, there's a lot of work to do, which I'm going to go through Pride of Detroit's article talking about free agents that the Lions should bring in. Offensive line is obviously very important. They have to address that, whether it's free agency or the draft, and you have to basically build an O-line in an offseason, which is very tough to do. And when we talk about offensive line play, guys, what's important is cohesiveness. Your offensive line has to be able to gel. So if you're finding 2 to 3 new starters this offseason, it's going to take some time for those guys to really gel. So it's something that Brad has to do, and then you're going to need a little bit of time to start the season for those guys to really gel. But you need a new O-line besides Penei Sewell and Tate Ratledge, basically. And you need to find out what's going on the other side of Hutch again. And we're in year 5 or 6, and we still are figuring out the answer to this question. It's frustrating. I mean, it just is. It's very frustrating. Nick says, didn't I hear last night the Seahawks signed 13 free agents? They did, and I kind of walked through that. They're not paying their quarterback has a $13 million cap hit. So, that's the reality. Their quarterback's making, I think his average salary, his AAV is like $30 million, but his cap hit was $13 million. So, they're able to do that because their quarterback is making pennies. So that's just the reality. This comment. So in reality that we are in a rebuild, should we even expect to do anything in the playoffs? that's the thing. You should still expect to do things in the playoffs. Like, that's where I'm not going to give the Lions a free pass here, because even though you do have limited resources, again, you don't have as much money as you had in the past. And, you don't have a third round pick this year. Like typically they had a pick pretty much every round. And I understand that you have a new O-line, new OC. Like, there's going to be some gelling that needs to happen. Like, I understand that as well, but you have a fourth place schedule. You have a team that for the most part has played together for the last couple of years. You have now a defensive coordinator that's been a part of this regime and this being calling plays for this year and, now last year technically, or I guess it's still this year. So it'll be 2 years for Kelvin Shepherd. Like, I don't think there's a lot of weight. Maybe the first couple games, you let things kind of get ironed out, but you should still be looking at this thing as, hey, we should go 12-5 or, at the minimum 11-6, get into the playoffs and at least have a chance to make a run. Like, we shouldn't be approaching this year as like a throwaway year. That's where, like, because technically this year people thought would be a throwaway year, which I don't agree with. I thought this year they should have been in the playoffs, but there's people out there that were like, oh no, I thought this year would be a throwaway year. Nah, not really. Like, this year you should have been in the playoffs. You had every opportunity. If you would have beat Max Brosmer and you would have beat the Steelers, or, you would have at least beat JJ McCarthy, maybe. Like, you won 1 or 2 more games, you would have been in the playoffs. You controlled your own destiny and lost. So, I mean, that's just the reality. Streams only. Can't believe Aleem has paid top 5 defensive tackle money. Not even close to that production to justify that price. Well, yeah, Byron Murphy. This is what frustrates me. Like, Byron Murphy plays defensive tackle for the Seahawks. Okay, they drafted him in the first round. He's a very good defensive tackle. Last year, didn't have a ton of production. I think he had like a sack or something. Second year, has 7 sacks. People tell me that Aleem's position isn't a production-based position. You're high. I mean, go look at some of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. They produce. They get sacks. And if you're paying Aleem McNeil top 5 defensive tackle money, he has to produce. Like, Aleem should be getting 7 to 8 sacks, 9 sacks a year. That should be like what Aleem does on a basis, on a year-to-year basis. Byron Murphy just got 7 sacks in his second year. I mean, we're at Aleem's like 5th year. I know he came off an injury, but I'm just talking for the future. That dude should give you 8 sacks a year. He's a 3 tech. He's not a nose tackle. He's supposed to be your pass rushing D tackle. He's supposed to be the guy who gets pressure, who gets sacks, who makes impactful plays. And, for 5 sacks as a career high, that's kind of tough. Like, he should be way more than that. Like, just the reality. Even if you have, and by the way, people were like, well, you have Hutch. Well, you don't have anyone else, right? I know you had AQM, but even prior to that, you haven't really had a guy on the other side that has been consistent. So the sack should be going to Aleem, if not Aiden Hutchinson. And that hasn't even been the case. So you hope Aleem can turn into that player, but we'll see. You already paid the money. So it is what it is. JC's the Aleem contract and golf contract put us behind the 8 ball. I mean, you could point to a couple of things. Those 2 things definitely play a part. I think, the golf contract makes things harder, but the reality is you didn't have a backup plan to not paying golf. You had to pay golf. You didn't have another option. I mean, what are you going to do? Move on from golf with no plan at quarterback? That's how regimes get fired. Like, you can't just be like, all right, golf, see you later. And we don't have a plan. If you had a guy waiting in the wings that's really good, or you think could be good, that's different. But you didn't have another plan other than Goff. Like, you had to pay Jared Goff. That's just the reality. Although money makes it more difficult, I agree. It's just that's what they had to do. That's just what they had to do. Jesse says Williams may take that jump like Murphy, possibly too, though. But agree, McNeil should be better. But he also didn't want to play DN. But Shep better not. Shep better not keep McNeil out there. Yeah, McNeil at defensive end was just coaching malfeasance. I don't understand how that was even a thought process. I really don't. And that's not Aleem's fault. That's Calvin Shepard's fault. Jay says, I blame you, Jeff. You told us Hendon Hooker was taking his spot. Well, I did. And speaking of things I've got wrong, that goes in the Hall of Fame of all-time bad takes. And Brad Holmes, I believed in Brad Holmes drafting quarterbacks. I was like, oh, this guy. And I liked Hendon out of college, but yeah, that was a complete failure. Did not work out. And by the way, I'm not going to fault Brad Holmes on that. This is where I don't expect. This is where I'm going to say, I'll say this on GM's drafting quarterbacks, like in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, whatever. If you're taking swings at quarterbacks, I'm not going to hold that against you. Okay. It's part of it happens. Like John Schneider took Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. They're developing him. Who knows if he'll work out? You're just taking a swing at the most important position in football. Now, if you draft a 1st round quarterback, you're held to a different standard. But taking a swing on a quarterback like that, I'm not going to say Brad Holmes, that's a fireable offense. Like, he tried, it didn't work out. It is what it is. I mean, you should be taking swings at quarterback. You should. Teams do it, and you might get lucky one time and find a guy like the Cowboys did when they drafted Dak Prescott in the 3rd or 4th round. And look at him, he's their starter, and now he's making a sick amount of money. But at the time, like, you might get lucky and hit on one of these guys. You know, like the Seahawks, speaking of the Seahawks, they drafted Russ in the 3rd round. Boom, worked out. So you never, I'm not going to fault Brad for that. You can take swings. Nick, appreciate the 5. He says every team that has won the past few Super Bowls has either had an elite DC or OC caller. I don't believe as of right now we have either. Well, that's fair, Nick. I don't think that's not a bad take. I think that's a fair take. You know, look, defenses win Super Bowl, guys. It's like last year when the Lions were 15-2. I was sitting up here yelling into the microphone, their defense isn't good. And now Jared Goff had all those turnovers, but still their defense wasn't good. So it was a combination of both. But defenses are what wins championships. That's been the oldest time. That's the reality. When you have a good defense, you're going to be in every game. It's just how it is. Even if you play sloppy football, you're going to be in every game. Okay. Like, look at the Chargers. The Chargers O-line had 5 of me blocking for Justin Herbert. 5 Jeffs blocking for Justin Herbert, and their defense was elite, and they made the playoffs. They didn't win anything, but they made the playoffs. The Patriots, look at their defense, and I would argue they're overachieving because their best players are Milton Williams and Harold Landry, and like, they have good players like Christian Gonzalez, but they're not like Robert Spillane was a free agent signing. Like, they're not this elite unit, but they're well coached, and they play really well collectively, and they're always in games, you know, because their defense is good. So, like, Carlton Davis, obviously former Lion, he's on there too. But yeah, defenses keep you in games. Defenses help you win championships, man. That's the reality. Offenses, you know, help. You need obviously a good offense, good quarterback. But yeah, defenses are what keeps you in games, man. When you go to the playoffs, teams make mistakes. You need a defense that will keep you in the ball game. And they just weren't able to do it. When they made that run in 2023, they had a really good scoring defense. Let's not forget that. But the reality was, that was a bend, don't break defense, and they overachieved. And they overachieved until they faced a 49ers team, and they gave up 30-plus points and lost. And they threw a 17-point lead in the second half. So, you know, that's I think they allowed, I don't know how many points they allowed the second half, but that defense melted down really bad. So I'm not saying get a bend, don't break defense. I'm talking about a really good defense. Point blank, period. Okay? Point blank, period. All right, let's dive into this. I want to show you guys what happened over the weekend. The Packers decided to hire Jonathan Gannon, Drew Petzing's boss. Is now the DC with Matt LaFleur. So how do we feel about that? Now you have at least Drew Petzing will know a little bit of what to expect. Same with Jonathan Gannon, but I've seen Packers fans upset about this, just like Lions fans were with Drew Petzing. So Packers fans were pissed off about this one. Seems like the Arizona Cardinals coaching staff from last year is kind of invading the NFC North. I will say this: I don't know if he's as good as Matt LaFleur. Or excuse me, I don't know if he's as good as Jeff Hafley, but he has a good defensive mind. Okay, so I don't think this is a terrible hire. You know, he's been a defensive coordinator for a team that made the Super Bowl, so there's that resume. But he hasn't been doing it a while. He's just been a head coach, so we'll see. Again, I think anyone would want to coach that defense. You got Micah Parsons and Rashawn Gary, and you know you got some pieces on defense that are pretty interesting. But Gannon is, you know, he's a bright defensive coach. I mean, he's not. I wouldn't say he's top of the market like, you know, the Vic Fangios and like you look at what Mike McDonald I just mentioned is doing with the Seahawks and some of these really good DCs, Jim Schwartz of the world. Like, obviously there's levels. Jesse Minter, what he did with the Chargers. Like, I wouldn't put him on that type of tier defensively, but you know, do we have the Darth Vader to their Luke? Technically, they have the Darth Vader to our Luke. Technically, I would say Jonathan Gannon is Darth Vader. I think that's the technically, but we have the Luke to their Darth Vader. Yes, we have the Luke to their Darth Vader. Yes, that's fair. But yeah, Now you got some you got an advantage for both teams now. Drew Petzing's going to know that Jonathan Gannon defensive scheme, and Jonathan Gannon's going to know a little bit about the Drew Petzing offensive scheme. So we'll see what happens there. But the Packers did make their hire official. But I wanted to dive in and show you guys what Pride of Detroit talked about. So they had an article, 4 cost-effective free agents to help the Lions get back to the playoffs. Okay, cost-effective free agents, because that's where we're at right now, guys. Cost-effective. We're not in the business of spending a bunch of money. Like I just walked you guys through earlier. They kind of missed their window to spend money, and now everyone's getting more expensive. All the impactful players that were cheap, that when they had money, are not cheap anymore. Jared Goff being a big reason, obviously, of that. His cap hit is high as hell. They're going to have to restructure his deal, but they're going to have to be smart in free agency and make impactful moves that aren't super expensive, or you can't really commit money like the Seahawks and the Patriots are able to do. But the Lions got to go out and sign some guys. So the Pride of Detroit, shout out to them. I'll give them credit for this one. It was a great article. They listed some free agents the Lions should entertain. The first one on this list is free agent center Cade Mays. Okay, Cade Mays. And they write here in the article how Tyler Linderbaum is obviously the top of the wish list for Lions fans. But they write here, but that pipe dream is mostly fueled by website rankings of the top free agents technically still available in 2026. The Ravens declined Linderbaum's 5th-year option last year because, unlike most other positions, those salaries aren't determined by the specific spot a player lines up along the offensive line. I.e., despite Linderbaum being a center, his salary is determined by the number of factors, including play time and Pro Bowl selections, but his salary is calculated from the average of the 3rd to 20th highest salaries of all offensive linemen over the past 5 seasons. Had the Ravens picked up his option, Linderbaum would have made $23.4 million in 2026, making him the highest paid center ahead of Kansas City's Creed Humphrey. So yeah, that's way too high. So just to clarify why they declined the option, I know people are like, oh, he's not staying in Baltimore. No, they just didn't want to pay him an insane amount of money. They still want to extend the guy, right? I think that would be, and they have Lamar Jackson. They want to keep their offense good. That's going to be a priority. They're going to try and extend him. So, that's just the reality. Okay, so let's just so we have that clear. Let's see. That all being understood, the Lions still need to figure out their plan at the center position, and that starts with what they think Tate Ratledge's talents are at best spent. Holmes did mention during his end-of-the-year presser that Ratledge didn't look, quote, like a fish out of water, end quote, but he spent the opening week of training camp repping at center, figuring out if he's the guy. Feels like the first thing the team needs to determine before anything else, but it has to be with a lot of conviction. This offense can ill afford stumbling out of the gate in training camp for the 2nd year in a row. I agree with that. If Ratledge is the plan at center, the team could instead focus on signing a veteran depth center to the main roster or practice squad, or if they could draft a developmental center player / center. Now that Kingsley is with the Cleveland Browns. I agree with this, by the way. We got to figure out what's going on with Tate. I mean, we just do. And to be honest, I'll say this, and I've said this before. I think Tate should just stay at guard. I think he can be a really good guard in the NFL. I do. And, maybe if you're going to go young at center, I think it's probably better. Maybe Tate Ratledge's already been in the system, so that would benefit the Lions. One thing I know for certain about Jared Goff is he wants experience at center. We remember last year, Tate was taking reps at center, and it was kind of out there that Jared preferred a veteran, and so did John Morton. Yeah, I agree. And I think that would probably be the route they take. So I agree with this part of it. You got to see, is Tate playing center or not? Because Cade Mays, by the way, could be an interesting option. This year, Cade Mays, he's a big dude. He's like 6'6", and he was pretty solid for the Panthers this year. He was he was 13th in pass blocking, not as good of a run blocker, 13th in pass blocking among centers, according to PFF. And he allowed 11 pressures on the year, no sacks, 3 quarterback hits, pretty solid. And I don't think he's going to be an expensive guy. So I actually agree with this part of it. Cost-effective guys, remember, not top of the market, but again, cost-effective. Cade Mays certainly would be a good option here. It says, we talked a little bit more. Jeremy Reisman highlighted Mays as one of the potential free agents to keep an eye on in the Panthers playoff game last weekend. While he didn't begin the season as Carolina's starting center, he took over the job in week 2 after veteran center Austin Corbett was pushed to IR with an injury. What's particularly noteworthy is how Mays kept the center job for the rest of the season, despite Corbett returning in week 7. Mays clocked 793 offensive snaps this season, the most he's registered in a single season in his 4-year career. 1,200 snaps at center. Experience, guys. Mays has the kind of experience to reassure Detroit on his dependability. It says his stout pass protection. Look at this: 21 pressures, 0 sacks allowed across 756 pass blocking snaps. Mays finished tied for 9th among 35 qualifying centers with an EFF of 98.6. For reference, Linderbaum finished 30th in the FF, allowing 26 pressures and 2 sacks. So I love it. The next one is Rayshawn Jenkins, safety. So this is where we get into this conversation, okay? They got to adjust that safety spot. The reality is, guys, we don't know what's going to happen with Kirby. I'm not going to try and pump out Kirby could be done playing football stuff. I think that's a little overreactive, if I'm being honest. I'm not going to go there yet. We don't have enough information. I think he'll be back. It's just going to take some time. I don't know how bad the knee injury is, to be honest, but I don't think it's a career-ending injury. But Brian Branch, on the other hand, tore his Achilles, and I don't know what's going on. Are you going to have Thomas Harper? But Thomas Harper's more of a free safety, so I don't know what's going on with that. But Rayshawn Jenkins could certainly help that. It says no position on the Lions roster felt the effects of the injury bug quite like the safety position in 2025. Heading into 2026, Detroit's back end has a unique challenge ahead of them. It mentions Brian Branch's Achilles tear. Kirby Joseph, fresh off a massive contract extension, dealt with chronic knee issues before being sidelined. Detroit getting solid contributions from veteran Avonte Maddox. The other safety spot was a revolving door of practice squad players whose inconsistent play certainly played a factor in the Lions running the 7th most explosive plays, 154 on defense in 2025. So, they talk about, is Kirby going to be playing football? Lions certainly won't be shelling out for a safety at the top of the market, but they're going to need to strike a sweet spot here. Reliable veteran depth, comfortable playing special teams, also needs to be a consistent player on defense for the time being with Branch and Joseph's injuries. Maddox is set to be a free agent, but he would welcome re-signing and likely very affordable. Thomas Harper showed some promise filling in at safety, free safety, and moonlighting in the box. He even earned the praise of Holmes, who mentioned Harper first when asked how pressing the need is at safety is this offseason. Talk about Dan Jackson, which, he's a 7th-round pick, man. He's more of a developmental player. But Rayshawn Jenkins, safety most recently with the Browns, is the kind of veteran who would fit that unique sort of player Detroit will be looking at for safety. I like that. Brown safety coach Ephraim Banda? I don't know how to say that name. Applauded Jenkins on his play and presence both on and off the field at the conclusion this season. Okay, so solid safety depth. He's versatile, playing all over the secondary, deep safety, in the box, even in the slot. I like that. He finished his last 4 seasons among safeties in PFF's run stop rate, tied for 16th. Okay, so they like that in 2022, 25th in 2023, 51st in his lone season in Seattle, 6th in 2024, and or 6th in this past season with Cleveland. Played special teams. Okay, I like that. So Rayshawn Jenkins, safety depth. There you go. So Rayshawn Jenkins, I don't hate it. They do need safety depth. That's not. I mean, even if they re-sign Avonte Maddox, they probably need more. The next one is Jonah Williams, offensive tackle, which he was with the Bengals, I think. Interesting. Oh no, he's with the Cardinals. I think one of the two. I think he went to the Cardinals. He played at Bama. I do remember that. But it talks about here's a position Lions fans have been relatively spoiled with since Campbell and Holmes took over. Talked about kind of Decker's final comments and how Drew Petzing could, help reunite Jonah with, with Drew Petzing, and he could join the Lions. It says here, Jonah Williams set career best marks in pressure rate, one-on-one pressure rate, sack rate, and average time to pressure in 2023 after switching from left tackle to right tackle for the first time in his career. So actually, guys, this could be interesting if you do decide to move Penei Sewell to left tackle. Jonah Williams could play right tackle, which I'm all for. And I think that's the important thing here. He requested a trade from the Bengals after they swapped him to the right side of their offensive line. Cincinnati let him walk. In his second season as a full-time right tackle, Williams played in 6 games, allowing 7 pressures, posted his best PFF or his season best EFF. Clayton Adams, the former offensive line coach in Arizona, was there for Williams' first season with the Cardinals. Williams and the offensive line took a considerable step back. Here's how those two lines compared. Yeah, you see that 2020. This is the Clayton Adams thing, by the way, I keep mentioning. Like, offensive line coach for the Cardinals left this past season, and they took a hit on offense. Offensive line, tied for 9th in adjusted line yards. They did have injuries, though. 2025, yeah, they took a step back in all those statistics. So it says here, if Decker decides to hang it up, Williams could have the opportunity to get back to work with a respected offensive line coach, Hank Fraley, and play alongside a promising right guard in Ratledge. Yeah, I like it. A reasonable deal in the neighborhood of 2 years, 18 to 22 million with incentives for meeting playtime thresholds could be realistic. They could roughly cost Detroit the money they've been saving if Decker were to retire, $11.6 million, and buy them some time to continue Giovanni's development. Well, good luck with that. David Adiamata is another one. Interior defensive lineman. Here we go. Defensive line help. Here we go. Interior defensive line help, which, by the way, not a crazy thing to say. They were terrible on the interior. David Adiamata. I think I'm saying that right. It says here, let's go through. They talk about Dan Campbell's were good comments. Holmes at edge. Conversely, bringing in interior defenders have been a point of emphasis. Levi and Aleem were taken in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, respectively, in 2021. McNeil earned a mega extension worth $97 million. Onzerique's first season post-rookie contract was over before it even started with an ACL injury. Holmes moved multiple picks in 2023 to move up to take Broderick Martin. Disgusting. In the 3rd round, drafted Mekhi Wingo in the 6th. And then most recently made Tyleik Williams the team's first-round pick in 2025. Michael Brockers, DJ Reader, Roy Lopez were other veterans brought in. So talk about Reader and Lopez could return to the middle, but both of them returning feels a bit redundant with what the team should be expecting to get out of Tyleik Williams in his 2nd season. Yeah, I don't think Reader comes back, by the way. I really don't. Animata will turn 34 in November, but you'd be hard-pressed to find the tape from 2025 where it's clear he was aging out of productive play. It says his ability to take on double teams in the run game and still make plays is something the Lions covet in their interior defenders. Animata finished tied for 15th among 143 qualifying defensive tackles and run stops. As a pass rusher, Animata's alignment versatility, everything from a 1-tech to a 4-tech, makes him a piece that could work in any combination. Rotation of Aleem, Williams, Animata, and returning Lopez could be an elite unit of interior defense. Also, connection to consider, 5 of Animata's 7 seasons with the Saints overlapped with Campbell's time as an assistant coach. Oh, okay. There you go. There's an important part. And honestly, I agree with all of these suggestions. I think safety, interior defensive line, offensive line are all the things that they need to address. I think part of Detroit nailed this article. When you're looking at free agency, you're looking at how can we improve on the O-line? How can we improve in positions we need depth, which is safety? And how can we improve on the defensive line? While edge is something that they're probably going to address in free agency, in the draft. Daniel Jeremiah put out his mock draft 1.0, and he had the Lions addressing the defensive line, but this was on the edge. Here's the edge they decided to take. Okay, so Miami edge, Akeem Mesidor. Mesidor had 12.5 sacks with the Canes this season. How would you guys feel if they took a defensive lineman, specifically an edge, in the first round? Like, how would you guys actually feel with this? He was productive, but here's the problem. The only problem I really see with this is not that he's a bad player at all. He was productive with the Canes. The Miami had a great defense, and he was a part of that. But I think by the time he gets on an NFL team, if I'm not mistaken, he will be 25. So by the time he gets his second contract, he will be almost 30. I'm just not a huge fan of that. I know some GMs don't mind that because you get a guy who's experienced. He was first team all ACC this year, second team all Big 12 in 2020. Played at West Virginia, transferred to Miami, and was really productive this year, but he's 24. He turns 25 in April. Like second contract, he's going to be almost 30, guys. I'm just being honest. But the reality, or the good reality of it is, if you do draft an edge, you won't have to worry about that spot next to Hutch if he's productive. I mean, you just won't. He had 12.5 sacks this year with Miami, 5.5 last year, or the prior year. So he is an experienced player. To me, it really depends on what happens in free agency. You know, if like I'm with streams only, I wouldn't be mad as long as O-line and free agency is addressed. You know, like if they go get a center and, you know, a veteran center, and maybe they do sign like a Jonah Williams or something, then maybe we could be like, oh, well, the offensive line's improved. Maybe they take a tackle in the second round or an offensive lineman in the second round. Maybe you can argue addressing an edge in the first round. I'm not going to be against it. We've been clamoring for this for years. So I wouldn't be as opposed. I still would prefer a tackle. I think there's a lot of good tackles coming out. I spoke with Scott Bischoff, which you guys can watch that video, and he kind of went through some really good tackles in the draft. It's on our YouTube channel. And there are some really good players in the first round. I think you could probably get an edge still in the second. Either way, I think pick 17 to me feels like a tackle pick. If they trade back, maybe you can still take like one of those Utah tackles and be happy with it, and you get draft capital. So again, I don't hate it. I would still prefer a tackle because, again, left tackle is something you got to look for the future, you know, or right tackle if you want to move Panay to left, which I agree with, by the way. But they should address that. That should be the number one priority. But then next up on that list is, what are we doing on the other side of Hutch? Okay, because AQM is going to be expensive. I'm not paying him, and you don't really have anyone else. So, I mean, that's just the reality. Akeem Mesidor, I'll tell you a little bit about him as it kind of pertains. If you're in love with PFF grades, if you're not, then disregard what I'm about to say. He was fourth among edges in overall grade. He was the third best run defending edge out of 850 qualified edges. He was 13th in pass rush, his pass rush grade among 850 edges. He's had big games against really good teams. He had a big game against Indiana, big game against Ohio State, big game against Texas A&M. Like, you know, he showed up in big moments. 55 total pressures, ranked 9th among qualified edges, 3rd in hurries. I mean, he was a productive player, and he's a guy who could play the run, which the Lions really like. He's 6'3", 280, has a little bit of versatility. I don't know how people feel about that, you know, the kind of the tweener thing, but he is productive. So it's not like the guy can't play or he's slow or something like that. I don't know enough about him as it pertains to like in-depth scouting. You know, that's something we're going to dive more into in the next couple of weeks when we do mock drafts, and you know, we'll watch more breakdowns and guys we'll bring on scouts that can kind of dive into like the pros and cons, but just looking at production and resume, he is a productive player. So, and he is a guy that a lot of people have going high in the draft, but you know how this works, guys. I mean, they say this, but then he could fall to the second round. Remember Mike Green fell to the second round. I know he had other things, but still, you never really know. James Pierce went to like 25 or 26 or something like that. So we don't really know where Mesidor is really going to go, for being honest. None of us really know. But it is an edge position, and I'll stand by it. I'm not opposed to it, but I just think you're going to have some really good tackles there that they're going to have to consider, which is going to make this decision way, way more interesting. I'll just be honest with you. Tim 21, this regime acts like a tight end can just double as a tackle. We've seen them expect that to work. In fact, it didn't. It doesn't. Stop trying to chisel stone, Dan. They are going to draft a tight end, by the way. They are going to draft a tight end. I could see that because because they need another tight end. They've been trying to figure out a third tight end, and I know they want to go more 13 personnel. I'm not saying it's going to be something they consistently do where it takes away from Amon-Ra or JMO and they just don't throw to wide receivers like people were saying Drew Petzing doesn't want to do. I think they're still going to get their guys involved. I don't know what it means for Isaac Tesla. And no, Tesla is not going to be a tight end. He's not going to be a tight end. Like, he's not. You're not going to tell a guy who's a very talented wide receiver to play tight end. Like, you're not doing that. And if I'm Tesla, you can get effed. Because if I'm Isaac Tesla, I'm seeing what these wide receivers are making. I'm not going to go to tight end, bro. I'm not doing that. I'm a good wide receiver. I've shown that, and he's shown he can do that. I'm not going to move to tight end because I have to fit your scheme. How about you guys fit me into your scheme? I'm a great wide receiver. Figure it out. Like that's not going to happen, guys. It's pointless to talk about it. And to be honest, that would be stupid. That would be really stupid if the Lions were like, hey, Isaac, can you like gain 15, 20 pounds to be a tight end? What? No. I've always been a wide receiver. I'm a damn good wide receiver. You traded up to draft me. So you know what you were expecting when you drafted me, which is a very good wide receiver. Like, I'm not going to transition to tight end and get paid and take on 20 million less. Like if I really blossom, I'm not saying Isaac's going to get that, but you got to think if I'm Isaac, I'm not going to get paid like a tight end. I'm going to get paid like a wide receiver. No, I don't think that's going to happen. That's you got to be able to. This is like what is Russell Brown? Shout out to Russell. He joined our show last week, and he said something very interesting. He said coaches always say this. KYP, know your personnel. Okay, know your personnel. And if you're Drew Petzing, you should look at your personnel and say, man, I got 3 really good wide receivers. Okay, I want to use these guys. Let's figure out how to utilize them. Okay, I'm not going to be like, well, I don't want to use 3 wide receivers. So Isaac, just bulk up and be a tight end. What? Come on. It's different being like Tate Ratledge. You want to play center? Then, hey, Tate, move to tight end. Thanks. Appreciate it. You know, I don't think I think the measurements are easy to say because he's 6'4". He's not a bad run blocker. He's a really good run blocker, actually. But he's a mismatch nightmare as a wide receiver. You can move him around. And I know you could probably argue, well, you could do that at tight end. I just don't think that's going to happen. I just don't. So if it happens, fine. I'm not going to, it is what it is. I just don't see it happening. I just don't. I'm not saying you're crazy. But I'm saying I disagree with that. I would just find a way to utilize him the way he is. He's a really good wide receiver. Okay. Then do it that way. And tight end, and by the way, tight end is something people mention this all the time when you talk about the tight end position. It's not as easy as just playing tight end. Those guys, I mean, tight ends have to know it's one of the hardest mental positions to play because you have to be aware of so many different things. You're kind of an extension of the O-line and you're a wide receiver. It's a lot different. You know, I guess when you go from guard to center, it is like there's a lot of things mentally you're adjusting to, but tight end is a high intellect position. You know, you got to be very smart to play tight end. Not saying Isaac's not, but it's not like an easy, like, oh, you could play tight end. It's like, well, Isaac could probably could grasp it, but it's not as easy as just playing tight end. There's a lot that they have to understand. They have to process. They have to know the roles of everyone around them. You know, it's just the reality. And, you know, we'll see. Maybe they utilize Isaac Tesla more and, you know, use 3 wide receivers, or maybe they don't. I don't know. But we'll see. I mean, that's why you guys know how I feel about the Jameson Williams contract. I think Jamo's an incredible player. Still doesn't really make sense to trade up for Isaac Tesla and extend Jamo. Like, without knowing, with 2 years left of control of Jamo and not knowing what you have in Isaac Tesla. You know, the guy could be a superstar and you just extended Jamo. So we'll see. And it says, is Jackson Meek still taking reps at tight end? See, they said that, but guess what? You never saw him at tight end. So it's not as easy as it seems, but we'll see. Maybe Jackson Meeks is the tight end. I don't know. And that's a different scenario because Jackson Meeks isn't as talented of a wide receiver as Isaac Tesla is. Like, all due respect. All right, we'll get out of here. Appreciate you all. We'll be live tonight, 8 to 10 p.m. So come join us. Me and Boone will talk about it. We'll talk about the playoffs. We'll talk about all the things I talked about and more. So come hang out with us. We'll have some great guests on this week. But until tonight, hit that like button on the stream, guys. It's free. It takes a second, and I much appreciate it. And get your merch, officialctsports.com. I'll catch you guys tonight, 8 p.m. But until then, have a good rest of your day.